Hare Krishna. Welcome to our channel, Bhagavad-gita. Here it is, because we are so fortunate that we have it. Bhagavad-gita as it is. Translation and commentary by His Divine Grace A.C. Bhaktivedanta Swami Prabhupada, and my name is Labanga Latika. Now we were reading from the 13th chapter, Nature, the Enjoyer and Consciousness, and there is a group of verses from 8 to 12 that are very long. So we started and we are continuing, so we will read those verses and get a little further in Prabhupada's purport. Stay with us.
Shri Guru Shri Juta Padakamalang.
So, yes, as you may have noticed, I like the Sanskrit. So I will read all the verses in the Sanskrit again. And by doing this, we pick up some terms and we start to recognize the words, and although we are not fully studying them, but they are still having an effect on the soul. Amanitvam adambhitvam ahimsa kshantirarjavam acharyo pasanang shauchang stairyam atma vinigraha indriyartishu vairagyam anahankara evacha janma mrityu jara vyadhi dukkha doshanudarshanam asaktiranabhishvanga putradara grahadishu nityang cha samachittatvam ishtanishtohopapattishu maye chananya yogena bhaktiravyabhicharini vivikta desha sevitvam aratirdyana sangsadi adhyatma jnana nityatvam tattva jnanartha darshanam etat jnanam iti proktam ajnanam yad atonyatha. Humility, pridelessness, non-violence, tolerance, simplicity, approaching a bona fide spiritual master, cleanliness, steadiness, self-control, renunciation of the objects of sense gratification, absence of false ego, the perception of the evil of birth, death, old age and disease, detachment, freedom from entanglement with children, wife, home and the rest, even-mindedness amid pleasant and unpleasant events, constant and unalloyed devotion to me, and this is obviously Krishna speaking, aspiring to live in a solitary place, detachment from the general mass of people, accepting the importance of self-realization, and philosophical search for the absolute truth. All these I declare to be knowledge, and besides this, whatever there may be is ignorance. So yes, hearing Krishna's words in the Bhagavad-gita helps us shift our perspective a little bit. When we think about knowledge, it's not always that we are thinking in these terms. So we read a part of the purport, and I will continue here a little bit in the middle. False ego. Yes, that's one of the points there. Absence of false ego. So false ego means accepting the body as oneself. When one understands that he is not this body, his body, and is spirit soul, he comes to his real ego. Ego is there. False ego is condemned, but not real ego. In the Vedic literature, Brihadaranyaka Upanishad, it is said, Aham Brahmasmi, I am Brahman, I am spirit. This I am, the sense of self, also exists in the liberated stage of self-realization. The sense of I am is ego, but when the sense of I am is applied to this false body, it is false ego. When the sense of self is applied to reality, that is real ego, there are some philosophers who say that we should give up our ego, but we cannot give up our ego, because ego means identity. We ought, of course, to give up the false identification with the body. Yes. So we have a lot of philosophical concepts and words that we use, and then when we come to the Bhagavad-gita, and especially when we come to the Vaishnava philosophy, those terms and those words are still there, but the meaning is a little different, because we shift our understanding, we shift our perspective. The perspective is coming. Here it's coming from Krishna, and from our point of view, it will come from the real ego. That's often a term we say, oh, he has so much ego. Oh, yeah. That usually doesn't mean ego. That means someone is easily offended and someone is full of themselves. But ego only actually means a sense of identity. But when we apply that identity to something that isn't us, like we can see that someone is driving a car and somebody else lightly touches them, and the driver becomes completely upset and said, he hit me, and he didn't hit you, because you are not that car. And with this body, when we become offended on different aspects of our bodily identity, of course, we are also not, propagating, becoming a doormat and letting people walk all over you, because that's also not good for you or for them. But this sense of being identified with this body, and because of that, basing our decisions, basing our identity, setting out in the direction of our life based on this body that we just happen to have for now. And we see that happens not just with the body, but with identity in a different sense. Like when I was younger, when going to school, identity was kind of held within music. If you like that kind of music, if you like that kind of music, it was kind of a statement, and it was kind of an identity, and those groups didn't really mix. And then we see it with political parties, with sports teams. You know, they come to the to watch the football, and then they go outside and fight. And we can, if we are not in that group, we can see it's ridiculous. And if we're in that group, we get swept away with the emotions and the identification. So that is not very helpful in spiritual life. It's also not very easy to give up, because how do I separate me from this body that I'm acting in and living in and working with? And when I look in the mirror, that's what I meet. Then when people know me, they can recognize me by sight, and they recognize my name. So it's a kind of a work, but with Bhakti Yoga it makes it easier, because the spiritual identity is not something abstract. The spiritual identity actually means our connection to Krishna in devotional service. And that's very helpful, because even before we have the full realization that we are not this body, we start to see ourselves as that person who is serving Krishna in different ways, even in this world, even in this body. One should try to understand the distress of accepting birth, death, old age and disease. Janma, Mrityu, Jara, Vyadhi. There are descriptions in various Vedic literatures of birth. In the Srimad Bhagavatam, the world of the unborn, the child's stay in the womb of the mother, is suffering. Its suffering, etc., are all very graphically described. It should be thoroughly understood that birth is distressful. Because we forget how much distress we have suffered within the womb of the mother, we do not make any solution to the repetition of birth and death. Similarly, at the time of death, there are all kinds of suffering. And they are also mentioned in the authoritative scriptures. These should be discussed. Yes, we don't often talk about that, because it gets a little morbid. Well, you come to a Krishna temple and someone will obviously talk about death. And then even when death happens, then we are not prepared, because we don't see death. We have built our society in such a way. There is a story about the Buddha, that he was a prince. He was born in a royal family, and there was a prediction that said that he will also become a very powerful king and take over the kingdom, and his father would be very proud of him. But if he sees, I don't think birth, but death, old age and disease, then it will change him. So the king kept him very sheltered. No old people were allowed. No sick people were allowed. Death wasn't shown or talked about. It was hidden. And at one point he's making a journey, and a servant is bringing him, and then they see a man who is old. So he's walking a little slowly. He's not so sharp. He's a little bent. He's a little shriveled in his skin. And the Buddha asks, well, at that time he wasn't known as the Buddha, but I don't remember his name. So he asked the servant, what is that? And he said, oh, that is an old man. What does that mean? It means he has lived for a long time in his life. So is that normal? And yes. Do we all become like that? And he said, oh, yes. Then they saw a sick man laying down on the path, and he asks again, what is that? It's a sick man. He has encountered a disease. Are we all susceptible to disease? Yes, we are. And they also saw a dead man, and he'd never seen that before. So he asked, what is that? It's a dead man. What does that mean? Well, he was living. And now there is no more life in his body, so the body will have to be disposed of, and his family is there crying. Will that happen to everyone? Yeah, that will happen to everyone. And at that point he became very renounced, because he gave up on material life. He realized the futility of it all. So, if we want to try to embrace material life, we cannot go into these details. But if we want to embrace reality and spiritual life, then it's actually very helpful. And then once you kind of have come to terms with it and realized, yes, that is the path of the body. It has been born, it will get old, probably have some diseases along the way, and then die. And after you die, you will also have to take birth again. So birth it's kind of a package deal. And it's not very nice. And then we know our spiritual identity means we can actually return to the spiritual world, where we are not subjected to this chain of birth and death, old age and disease, because those pertain only to the body, and actually we are not the body. And I have to stop saying actually in every sentence, isn't it? But you know what I mean. So that's the sentence. Janma mrityu jara vyadhi dukkha doshana darshana. Janma, birth. Mrityu, death. Jara, old age. So vyadhi, that must mean vyadhi, means disease. Or dukkha, the suffering of it. Dukkha doshana, the distress, dukkha, dosha, the fault. Anudarshana, seeing it. Darshan means to see. So that is the vision of a person who is not in illusion. So that means knowledge. We know what is what. These should be discussed. And as far as disease and old age are concerned, everyone gets practical experience. No one wants to be diseased, and no one wants to become old, but there is no avoiding these. Unless we have a pessimistic view of this material life, considering the distress of birth, death, old age and disease, there is no impetus for our making advancement in spiritual life. So it kind of starts there. We don't approach Krishna just because we want to avoid suffering, but the built-in problems of this world kind of shakes us up a little bit, awakens us. There is a Sanskrit term that I also don't remember, but at the time of the funeral, the Vedic tradition is that you burn the body. Either way, you come together, you speak about the person, you realize that even when you can see the body, the person you knew, your friend or your family member, that person is not there anymore. That person is not accessible. And in that situation, sometimes this facing up to the Janma Mrityu Jara Vyadi wakes us up a bit and makes us think about the futility of material life, makes us a little bit inclined towards spiritual life and self-realization and some sort of renunciation, taking more seriously the permanent aspects, the spiritual life. That often comes and goes again, but here Prabhupada said this should be discussed. We should talk about these things. We should have a realistic approach to life. It doesn't make us pessimistic because we can fill it in with so much of the good stuff, of the factual spiritual reality that we have access to, both, of course, in the long term, going back to the spiritual world, but also right here when we are engaged in Krishna consciousness, in spiritual activities in this very body, then everything changes. Then we are no longer bound by this material existence. We become transcendental. We kind of, it is possible to rise above this whole situation, but that cannot be done by ignoring it. It's like whatever obstacle you face, if you if you have to cross a river or something, it can be done. One can find a boat or a bridge, or one can swim. But if one doesn't realize or doesn't accept the fact that here is a river, or just walk straight into it, that's not going to solve it. So like that, we want to be realistic. We want to be aware of reality as it is. So this verse certainly aids us in that pursuit, and there's a lot more to read, and I don't just want to skim over it, because each part it's interesting and it's enlightening to hear about. So we will continue the next time. Thank you so much. Hare Krishna.
Thank you for watching. We aim for updates every Tuesday and Friday. Please come back. If you have any questions or comments, please leave them down there. We also have some links and information for you. And there is, of course, the subscribe button. Thank you. Hare Krishna.
I'm a Hare Krishna, and I approve this message. Subscribe.
Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama.